we're talking, I'm at Newham Sixth Form College. We've got Asif, who's at, somewhere in East London, and Georgie is, I believe, as well. I don't quite know everyone's location at the moment. So welcome, everyone. I was going to say a few brief things. So welcome to one of the New Vic's lectures that we've been doing this year under the banner of African Studies, but we're kind of broadening that out to really looking at, you know, issues in the third term to remembering our past. So keep looking at the website because there will be some very interesting upcoming talks. There's one about, I believe, about slavery revolts in Cuba, and right at the beginning of July, there's a very interesting talk about the Mahdist period in the Sudan and the holdings that artifacts that were captured in the Sudan wars in the late 1890s by General Kitchener's armies, brought back to England and stored in military museums, often mislabeled and now gathering dust. And people have been working on a project to bring them together. But today's talk is about hidden histories of BAME sailors in the First World War. And we're focusing on Britain's merchant marine and its sailors. And the merchant navy was used by the British Empire, or the British Empire was used by the merchant marine as a source of labour. And really, historically, we had mixed communities in places like Liverpool, South Shields, Cardiff, and the London Dock area where we are now, Poplar and Cable Street. I have a personal interest here because, you know, my father came to Britain as a sailor in the 1940s, and he remained in the merchant marine until, you know, for 40 years actually. So when I first heard Asif speak, it was just and Georgie interviewing him. That was what I wanted to hear. Okay, people's histories that have been forgotten. I knew they existed. My brothers and sisters knew they existed, but they just weren't regarded as history by people. But people like Asif and Georgie are helping to put history on the map. So, Georgie and Asif, you take over. We're here. Okay, I'll switch my mic off. You can begin the presentation.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to start as an introduction, and it's really nice. I just saw the names, and there's some familiar names there of people who are doing their own research in this area. So great to see you. What we're going to be doing is I've got a slideshow, and Asif is going to talk to the slides with me asking a few questions along the way. Alan, do we still have 35 minutes for this? I'm assuming, okay, I'll can't hear you because you're on mute. Okay, all right. So, yeah, I didn't read. Okay, so, what we're going to be talking about today, what Asif is going to be talking about today, is how looking for his grandfather's World War I war medals, how you, Asif, have been able to build a picture of your grandfather's life, and that fits very well with the title of Remembering Our Past. So I'm just going to start by sharing my screen. That hasn't happened yet. Let me just see. Don't all want. Okay, right. So can everybody see the slides? Yeah, you can see it. Okay. All right. So Asif, would you like to start by telling us about your grandfather?
Yeah, thank you, Georgie. My grandfather was born in 1895. He passed away on 16 August in 1965. And that's him on the right. And on the left is my grandmother, Mrs. Muhammad, and she was born in 1908 and she died in 1989, and that's her on the left.
Okay, thank you. So these two letters here are the communication between your grandmother and you, and her right to your grandfather's pension after he passed away. And this is what started your investigation into your grandfather's history and his life. So could you say a little bit more about these?
That's right, Georgie. Basically, my grandmother wrote to the Ministry of Social Security in 1967 with regards to my grandfather's pension. And he died in 1965, but he worked in the UK from 1952 to 1965. So as part of a pension claim, she sent his 2 war medals. This was the British War Medal and the Mercantile Marine War Medal to the overseas group in 1967. And you can see the letter on the 11th of April 1967. It is noted that the 1914, 1918 war medals supplied by you in support of your claim bear on the rim the inscription Muhammad Gama. And then on the other letter, she mentions about my husband served in the war. I could produce the war medals if and when required.
Did you know about this history?
It's an interesting question, Georgie. I actually didn't know about this history prior to 2011. It was in 2011 that my mother had our home refurbished in Pakistan, and my uncles was to invite me back home to have a look. And we went and we had a look at the home, and it was pretty nice. But my grandmother's belongings were stashed into my grand uncle's garden. And my grand uncle was saying that if there's anything you might wish to keep, might wish to go and have a look before we discard all of it. So I did have a look, and my mother was mentioning that my grandmother had a box, and it seemed like a magic box actually. But she was saying that he had a box. She had a box, and if you could find that box, and I was telling Mum that it's all a load of, shall I say, rubbish to me. It's all old and old duvets and pillows and old pots and pans, which I thought that should be thrown away. But my mother was saying, look for the box, and I searched for the box, and I found the wooden box, and I didn't think there was anything much in it apart from some papers in the Urdu language. But I came across some papers in the English language, and two of these are before you at the moment on the screen. So these were something like 2 or 3 pension letters that were from the Ministry of Social Security from the overseas group in Newcastle upon Tyne, and then a few that she had wrote, but again, she hadn't actually wrote these. A local gentleman who worked in registrar, he actually wrote them for her on her behalf, and she actually thumbprint them, stamped them. So these were the letters, and it actually came as a surprise to me because when I came across these letters and I began reading them, and I came across a certificate of service for Rohama Hassa, his actual name was Rahima Hassa, and it said a certificate of service in the Mercantile Marine for 1914 for the First World War. It listed various vessels like the SS Kaiser Hind, the SS Mongolia, the SS Delta, the SS Syria, which served as hospital ships. So it was quite interesting to find all of this. Is there anything else you'd like me to add, Georgie?
Oh, yeah, it's amazing, and I'm just going to show a picture of well, no, I think we're going to come to that, but I'm just going to show a picture of the medals that you've spoken in detail. You've written about your whole search for these medals once you discovered the references to them in the box, in the magic box, where there were letters about them, but there were no medals, and that led to a whole journey for you, which we're not going to be talking about today, but because what we're interested in is about your grandfather's life and what you've been on ships during the period of the First World War. But do you want to just say a little bit about the?
Yeah, what you can see before yourselves on the screen is the British War Medal.
Just what they are.
grandfather received, and he received the Mercantile Marine War Medal as well. It's quite a long search. I could say one of them was actually sold by Coin Sale, a dealer based in Devon, Jim Strawbridge, and I managed to purchase the medal back from him. And this one again, the medal you're seeing now is the Mercantile Marine War Medal, and this was sold by E-Medals in Canada, and it was sold in 2016. I didn't manage to get this medal back though.
So if there's anybody who's listening to this who thinks that they might have a medal like this in a box in their house, or might be able to track one down through the kinds of ways that you manage, they could refer to some of the other things that you've written about, which we can talk about at the end. But one of the issues for you, and also for anybody else from a South Asian or African background seeking to find out about the lives of your grandparents or great-grandparents, is around the spelling of names and the anglicization of Muslim names, the writing of Urdu names, Arabic names in English. Here's obviously the shortened form of your grandfather's name, which is different to the name, and in the letters that we showed earlier, there was some discussion about whether your grandfather was really who your grandmother said that he was. And I know that you've managed to identify the unusual way that your grandfather's name was spelt then, through finding contemporary examples of that spelling of his name. Do you want to say anything about that?
That's right. My actual grandfather's name was Muhammad, but it would be actually pronounced as Muhammad, probably in English, or it was anglicized as Muhammad, Mahomed. So it came as a surprise because I couldn't quite understand the spellings of the name. And again, Gama was actually an abbreviation of the name Ghulam Muhammad. So the first letter in the Arabic, for example, the Gain, and then the letter Mim, that would just produce the sounds Ga, Ma, and it would just be shortened as Gama. So for Ghulam Muhammad. So his actual name was Muhammad, son of Gama, which you refer to as Muhammad, son of Ghulam Muhammad. And again, you could see on the screen, it was quite common back then because you could see a billhead for Yusuf Haji John Muhammad and Company, Cheap Jack, Tailors and General Outfitters. And this was dated on 15th of January in Bombay in 1906. And it says, again, it shows the name of this tailor anglicized. And it's quite common because if you look at I looked back at the various editions of the Illustrated London News and the Graphic, and you find various articles such as you find the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire in 1911 on the Graphic or the Illustrated London News. You find his name as anglicized as Muhammad, Sultan, the Caliph of the Muslims or something. So it was quite common back then. And it occurs in many documents I came across for many seafarers. It takes a lot of time to explain it, but you find a lot of seafarers' names that were anglicized. You find Ghulam as, short for, it'd be anglicized as Goolam, whereas we would never spell it as in that form in present day.
So that means that when you're searching for your ancestors, you have to have your mind open to alternate spellings of the name. But for you, it was useful because his name was quite identifiable for you, which we'll look at later when we find the crew lists. Sorry, did you want to add something, Asif?
No, thank you.
Okay. So identifying the name is one issue. Another one is just around the term lascar, which, as I think everybody here knows, is the name given to this particular category of Indian seafarer. And again, there's been a lot written and no need to go into a great discussion about that now. But did you want to say anything about these particular documents that you've found in your search for your grandfather?
These documents are interesting actually because a lot of these documents actually belong to me. They're not actually taken from the local archives or the British Library or the National Maritime Museum or the National Archives. It's interesting because I was looking at, my grandmother said that he was told through oral history to my mother. It was transmitted via one link, which is my mother. She mentioned that he was in the army. And when I found the certificate of service for Mahasa, it was the Mercantile Marine. And now the army and a seafarer is quite different. So I couldn't quite understand why she said he was in the army. And I searched into this quite further. And my mother was saying that she said he was a lascar. So he was in the army. And lascar literally means army, or it stands for army. It could be used in the army, it could be implied as a military sense or non-military sense too. And in this case, because he was, it's literally meant a men of army. Like I say, if I send a men of army to help you, that's not an army of military in the military sense, but it's an army of men that I'm dispatching to help you, aid you. For example, if it's an earthquake relief program or something. So yeah, and there was a lot of interesting things about this word, because I looked at this word through various dictionaries, and I found this word in the Oxford Concise Dictionary, the meaning of this word, that was published in 1911, the first edition, and I got this from the 1976 edition. And it mentioned that he was actually the lascar actually meant was actually East Indian sailor, but the word was ultimately from Urdu and the Persian word lashkar, which meant army or camp, and it was misapplied compared with the word lashkar. So lascar was misapplied for the word lashkar, and it's inviting you. The dictionary actually invites you to look at the word lashkar. And again, through the other documents that I find of the P&O, which were published in 1950, I discovered that the word lascar was actually is referred to as lascar is a term generally applied to Indian seamen and means nothing more. And in other documents we find that, for example, I've came across a book which was published in not too long ago. Actually, it was actually published quite long ago. It was 1913, and it again identified. It gives the word lascar as a race. And if I quickly read this, if it's all right, Georgie, it says, the lascars are a race of sailors and take kindly to seafaring ways. And this was on page 57 of Peeps at Great Steamship Lines, the P&O by G.E. Mitten. And lascar is not actually a race. In Urdu, it actually means, lashkar means army, and it's from the Persian word lashkar, which is spelled lam, sheen, kaf, ra, and it comes from the Arabic word askir, which is spelled ain, sin, kaf, ra. And they all, in Arabic, askir has 4 letters. In lashkar, the Persian word, the Urdu word, it also has 4 letters. The only 2 differences is the first 2 letters. So it's a derivative of that letter. And I could go on for quite long on this.
Yeah. And it's a really important issue, but for here it's important as well, because one of the things that you've been doing, as you mentioned, is you've just been collecting through eBay or all sorts of other ways. You've managed to accumulate your own museum, your own archives of original material about Indian seafarers referred to as lascars or lashkar. And one of them goes all the way back to a republication, one from 1799, which refers to Bengal lascars.
Yeah, that's right. It's quite interesting because I came across this book called The Travels of Mirza Abu Talib Khan. And Mirza Abu Talib Khan was a Persian scholar. And it's interesting because he mentions in his book in volume 1, on page 21, which is on the screen, he mentions about indolent and inexperienced Bengal lascars. And now this is in 1810, mentioning Lashkar, Indian seaman. He would not have used the word lascars or lascar because because Mirza Abu Talib Khan actually used the word Lashkar, and he wrote this book in Persian language. It was translated by Charles Stewart into English and published in 1810. So he's used the equivalent or the misapplied equivalent of lascar, but the actual Persian language, in the actual Persian edition, Mirza Abu Talib Khan, a great scholar, he actually uses the word lashkar.
And of course, lashkar is one of the words that was being used on board ship. And another thing that you were talking to me about yesterday when we were talking about this is about how your grandfather didn't speak very much English, so you were thinking about, okay, what was his communication, means of communication back in 100 years ago. And you have found this dictionary of Lashkari Hindustani from 1911, which has got a wonderful mix of words, which I think you might like, you want to talk a little bit about here.
Yeah, that's right. I always wondered how my grandfather would have conversed or communicated with the English crew on board the ship, because he couldn't actually speak much English from I hear from oral history. I hear that he used to gesture sometimes. So I always wondered, how would the other Indian seamen communicate with the English crew? So I think it was through the sarang, which is the head or something, who was the head of the seafarers. So he would be trained, an expert in the English language, and he would communicate with them to the captain. And I came across this book, and it was quite interesting because it's published in 1911, as you said, Georgie, in London. And it actually mentions interesting words like jahaz, for example, and it interprets jahaz nowadays in Urdu would be understood as a plane in modern day, in present day language. It would be understood as a plane, an aeroplane that flies in the air. But jahaz literally meant in Urdu, a vessel. So back then they would have referred to a ship as a vessel. So they would have said jahaz. So you could see the English equivalent, ship, and it says jahaz, and you find argboat, which is a steamship, and arg literally means fire, and in the Urdu language, and boat, you obviously got the English, which is taken from the English, and then you find jahaz wala, the crew that belonged to the vessel, the ship crew, and then you find captain. For example, you find the captain. You find the English equivalent or similar is actually Kaptan, Kaptan Sahib. And Sahib is actually an honorary word, and not, and actually it actually doesn't mean captain, but is an honorary word.
Okay. And you've got the whole dictionary, I assume, as well as.
That's right.
And you've also been searching through and have managed to find original pictures. This is 1922, I think. It's not of your grandfather, but it is from 1922, which was a time when he was on the ships. So it gives a little bit of an idea. Do you want to say something about this?
That's right, Georgie. My grandfather was still on the Indian Merchantman until 1950 when he left. So he spent something like 30 odd years in it, 32 years or so. And yeah, this was quite interesting because the certificate of service I found for Rahma Hassa, he served on a couple of vessels in 1922, and my grandfather did too as well. And this was interesting because this was published in the Times Weekly Illustrated edition of the Times Weekly, and it was published in the Illustrated section. And it says lascar at boat crew, and it reads underneath the image, as an indirect result of the inquiry into the loss of the liner Egypt, special prizes were offered to lascar seamen for off-boat drill efficiency at a life-saving display held recently in the Firth of Forth issues in Scotland. So it's interesting because it shows them South Asian seafarers, obviously wearing hats, pulling a rope on board a vessel.
So moving on from the general, we now get to the very specific. I know, and I think maybe other people who've heard you before know the many, many ships that you have been able to identify your grandfather Muhammad Gama being a part of the crew of. But today we're going to be focusing on the Kiva because of the particular journeys that he did in that, and the other people who are on the crew lists. So this is a picture of the Kiva. What would you like to say about it?
Yeah, the Kiva is quite an interesting vessel because it's a vessel built by the P&O, for the P&O, sorry. And it was sort of like I think it was built in 1914. And my grandfather, it's just interesting because this vessel was the vessel that my grandfather served on. And on this vessel, he arrived at the Royal Victoria docks in Newham and the Royal Albert dock, and he stayed there for a month. And he served on other vessels such as the PNOSS Medina. He served on the PNOSS Multan, which again, the Medina was sunk in 1915. And so it's interesting. But going back to the Kiva docked at the Royal Victoria Dock on 8th December 1917, and it stayed there for a month. And we find other seafarers such as Dada Ahmed Hyder Khan, and he served with my grandfather on this vessel, and they stayed there for a month. So, and he sort of left on the first week of January 1918 after it was refitted for military purposes of transporting troops from New York to the UK for the onward journey to France.
I'm just going to move to the crew list so that you can talk about that. So this is is this something that you have obtained, or this is an image that you've obtained, the logbook?
So this is, Georgie, an image I've obtained from the National Archives. So I don't actually hold this original. It's actually an image that I've obtained from them.
Right.
And it mentions about Bombay mails and passengers and cargo which they were transporting from Bombay to London.
And it's got that proof that the ship was in the London dock on the 8th of December 1917. And then this is the Victoria and Albert dock for anybody who's not familiar with it. And this is a section of the crew list for the voyage that would have happened at the end of that 1 month stay in Victoria Dock. Because this that was in November, December 1917, and this is January, arriving in New York from London in January 1918. And can you see it, Asif?
I can. I think
yeah. So if you can see your grandfather's name. So do you want to talk about that entry?
Yeah. My grandfather's name occurs on line 12 as in the anglicized writing, and it says Muhammad Gama, but it's actually Muhammad Gama, and it says he was 23 years old, and it says his weight, his height, and it documents that they arrived in New York on the 21st January 1918 on board the Kiva, and it says from the port of London in 1918, and this was when they left in January, the first week of January. They arrived there on the 21st of January, and they stayed there for a while in New York.
And it says that he was 23. Do you think he was 23?
I actually think, because he joined the Mercantile Marine in 1913, so he must have been, it could possibly that he was 23. It could even be that he was much younger, because a lot of seafarers I actually found were much younger and actually gave incorrect date of birth or year of birth, to serve in the Mercantile Marine.
And it says under nationality, it says East Indies, and there's another. Okay, so now I've got another part of that same crew list, and here you mentioned earlier. So the person who's number 10 on this list that you referred to, Hyder Atta, but that's not how you knew him.
Yeah.
So I'll just move on to the next slide so that you can talk more about him.
That's interesting, because that's Dada Ahmed Hyder Khan, but Dada is actually not a name. It just means grandfather. It's an honorific title. His actual name was Ahmed Hyder Khan, but on the crew list, his name appears in the anglicized spelling. You can see Ahmed spelled as AMEER. And on his actual memoir in his book, he is actually spelled.
I don't know if I've frozen or you're frozen. I can't hear you.
His father's name. So he would have been named after his father as Ahmed Hyder, son of Atta Muhammad. So that's his name. And again, Ahmed Hyder is interesting because he was on the Kiva with my grandfather. And the only thing is that when Ahmed Hyder arrived in New York on 21st January, somewhere during, I think, it was February 1918, him and another colleague deserted from the Kiva for in the hope of a better life. And one of these was Wabdin Ditta, whose name actually occurs on the list for deserting. And he was a fireman, and Ahmed Haidar was a Baniwala, and a fireman again was someone who just shoved coal into the furnace in the engine room. And again, going back to Ahmed Haidar Khan, he wrote a memoir. In the book you see is his memoir, and it was published in 1989, and that's the first edition. That's volume 1, and he mentions about his life at sea and how he stayed at the docks. And if I just mention quickly, if you've got time, Georgie, on page 120 on his memoir, he mentions after taking some additional men from reserve which the P&O kept near the docks, and having our photographs taken for identification cards, the Kiva, this as Kiva crawled out of her mooring place in the first week of January 1918. And again, he mentions about the Kiva staying there at the Royal Victoria docks for a month while it's refitted. So again, I won't go into too detailed because it'd take quite long.
But I think it's just such an amazing find to have discovered your grandfather's name on exactly the same crew list. Maybe there were over 300 crew, but they were sharing the space on the ship, and to have the insights of Dada Amir Haidar Khan to read must feel really special to you.
It was special because it gave me a lot of information which I didn't know, because all I knew that they arrived on 8th December, but I wondered, where did my grandfather go? What did he do? Where did he stay? And it was in Ahmed Haidar Khan's memoir that I found that the vessel had to be kept in London until the end of the year for cannon flagging and some other alterations to prepare for her new role of carrying supplies and men from the USA to the United Kingdom and France. And he mentioned this on page 119. So it gave me an idea where my grandfather might have stayed, what he might have done, along with Ahmed Haidar. And Ahmed Haidar again mentions about how they went into this, they left the Kiva and they went into the docks and explored various places in London and Commercial Street, and we went to Woolwich and so forth, just like Mirza Abu Talib Khan mentioned. He went to Woolwich and so forth, and that's quite near to me because actually that's in Newham, where I live, and it's just not too far from me actually.
You also found, I think, some information about Faizu Mir. Do you want to say anything about him?
Yes, it's right. It's interesting, George, because I found about other seafarers like Mir Faisal, for example, who died on the voyage from London to New York. That was the first voyage they made to New York, and they arrived there 21st January. But he actually died on board the vessel, and his funeral was performed on the vessel, and he was given a burial at sea. And how the Indian seafarers, they gathered together to offer his funeral rites on board the Kiva. And Ahmed Haidar Khan mentions about various accounts of how the body was lowered and weights were attached to the body, and it was lowered at sea at the direction of the commander, Harold Potter, and it was lowered into the ocean. And sadly, we never saw him again, as some of the crew mentioned.
Yeah, it's really interesting to have those insights. So now we're moving on, and this just gives a real impression of the amount of the many times that your grandfather crossed the Atlantic during the First World War. So the other was from January, arriving in New York. Now he's arriving in New York again in May 1918. So his name is here at the bottom, Mohammed Gama, number 8. And then this is also a very interesting set of crew lists, because as you can see here in the column marked race, it has got East Indian, and in the column marked nationality, it says British East Indian. And you've managed to capture some images of other pages of the same crew lists of people who were engaged on this ship. So would you like to talk about these people?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because we find other seafarers. For example, we find the name Juma Muhammad. He was described as on the crew list as Black African, so he was actually an African seafarer, and he was the coal trimmers sarang, and literally explain what it means. Sarang means someone who's the head of the coal trimmers, but sarang comes from the word sar. And sar literally means in Urdu, it means head. So the physical head, so physically means head. So he was sarang, and his name was Juma Muhammad. And Juma was a very popular or prevalent name, was very prevalent in South Africa, but it was also getting quite popular in Pakistan and India in present day. So I came to realize that he must have been a Muslim seafarer from probably South Africa, but we can't say for certain, or possibly even Somaliland, British Somaliland, or Zanzibar, or even like Egypt, or even Yemen, going a bit to the Middle East.
So there's at least on here, I think about 9 people who are recorded as African Black. And then the following sheet, again, there are more. And at the bottom, I think if you can see it, Asif, there's some places crossed out. So Muscat, Zanzibar, Basra, and then there's references to East Indian as well as African and as well as Black from that same ship. We think it hasn't to date on this, but I think you said it was a follow-on sheet from the other one that we just showed.
That's right.
So you don't know anything about any of these crew members apart from the fact that you've discovered their names on the same grandfather.
That's right. I looked at 4 crew lists, and they're quite detailed with huge amounts of names on them, and something like 200 or 400 names. And there was quite a number of on each of the crew lists where my grandfather was for January, March, May, and July. Even you find there was at least a dozen or so African seafarers present on the vessel, and they had engaged from Bombay. But some of their nationalities you might find the word like Basra mentioned there, or Somalia, or even Egypt. So it was quite an interesting find, because I would have thought it would have just been South Asian seafarers engaging at Bombay, but I found it was actually the story was much bigger than what I thought. There was actually seafarers, Arab seafarers, engaged from Bombay. I came across a name like Fazal Ahmad, and he was from Egypt. And his name could not have been Fazal Ahmad. It must have been Fazal Ahmad, the son of Ahmad, Fazal Ahmad bin Ahmad in Arabic.
And just to finish off the end of that list, I'm just showing this because there are more names here, but I think I have to shoot through because this one now is just a record of your grandfather being on the same ship, but 2 months later. So this is now arriving in York on the.
Can I just mention something, Dave Georgie?
In July 1918. Yeah.
Sorry to disrupt you. This is interesting because this one of 8th July 1918 shows when they arrived on the Kiva back again in New York. But I always wondered how long did they stay there. And I came across a book called The Road to France. And it's interesting because this book is called The Road to France, The Transportation of Troops and Military Supplies, 1917-1918 by Benedict Crowell, and it's published in 1921 by Yale University Press. And it actually mentions in here the Kiva sailed from New York. So in that crew list it says the 8th of July. I was wondering how long they would have stayed there, but from this book I established that they left on 14th July. And it mentions the Kiva sailed 14th July 1918, and it sailed with something like 1,552 total officers and men on board, which was the American crew of the American Army. Sorry.
So then
they possibly stayed in New York for 7 days, which is an interesting find.
So that gave yet another layer of understanding to what your grandfather was doing and who he was sharing space with on the ships. So you haven't done any specific research about Somali or other African seafarers, but you do know about other research that others have done. And I think you particularly wanted to mention Ali Abdullah, who there's a segment from a here.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, Georgie. That's right. Ali Abdullah was quite interesting because he was put down on the crew list by Harold Potter, the commander of the Kiva, as African. They generally put black African, but he put it as African. And it was interesting because Ali Abdullah, I found his name crossed out on the crew list, a line going through it, as you can see on the screen. And it says, and I searched him on the actual crew list available at the National Archives. And now you wouldn't find names of South Asian seafarers on the crew list as the British crew, the same as the British crew. But Ali Abdullah was happened to be on there only because he actually died. And Harold Potter noted that he died on 21st January 1918 upon arrival in New York. So I presume he must have been buried in a public grave. But he mentioned on the crew list another interesting find that he died of syphilis, a sexually transmitted infection.
So you mentioned people dying and being buried in public graves, and you identified a seafarer who was buried in West Ham.
That's right, Georgie. I came across various names such as something like 30 or more names of South Asian seafarers that were buried in West Ham Cemetery in unmarked public graves. And I particularly searched, I went to investigate one particular seafarer, and this was Abdul Rahman, or Abdul Rahman as put on the list. And the image you see is actually an image of the registrar's record held at the West Ham Cemetery. So I've actually taken an image of this, and it says that his last abode was the Seamen's Hospital. So we learned that he stayed at the Seamen's Hospital, and he actually stayed at the old site, which was on Connaught Road, which has now been demolished in 1899, which was built in 1899. He stayed there. As you can see, the actual foundation stone, which myself and Georgie visited. And this is actually the foundation stone of the Seamen's Hospital Society, and it says July 1889, sorry. And that was the foundation stone for the first site, which was again demolished, and the site was relocated to Allenwick Road at the new site. And again, the foundation stone was also taken to the new site. And the foundation stone on the right hand side, the 1889 one, is the one where Abdul Rahman would have stayed at before the site was demolished, and that was off Connaught Road, just near the Royal Albert Dock.
Which was part of the environment where you were imagining Muhammad Gama when he was staying over for that 1 month in 1917, 1918.
That's right.
So that was in you've got the year here, haven't you? That was in
1901.
Yeah,
I think it was 1901.
Yeah.
Perhaps September 1901.
Okay. So I'm shooting through because I know we're running out of time. This is a much later image, but it is of the Seamen's Hospital from the 1940s. I just zoom through because I think these are really just illustrative pictures, because these are all things that you found whilst you've been looking to track down more information about your grandfather. So shall I just go through them and you just say a couple of words about any of them that you want to?
I appreciate it, Georgie. Thanks.
Yeah. So, yeah, did you want to say anything about this image?
This is taken from the Illustrated London News, and this was published in, I think, 1911. And it shows the image on the right at the bottom of the screen. You can see the seafarers, South Asian seafarers, and one of them seems like to me probably to be a Bangladeshi seafarer, because I could see from the hat on his head, and I could see the beard, and from that it seems like to me it's probably a Bangladeshi seafarer, and they're sort of unloading or offloading off a ship at the Royal Docks during the strike in 1911.
Do you want to say anything about this one?
Again, that's in 1904 or 1906. It's again from the graphic or the Illustrated London News, and it shows South Asian seafarers. I think it's 1904 actually, at the Royal Albert Docks, and it describes them as a curious celebration, and it says a curious Hobson Jobson curious Hindu celebration, but it's actually not a Hindu celebration. It's actually the Ashura festival that the South Asian seafarers were celebrating, and they've made which was something which was described as a temple. It was actually not a temple. It was actually, just what can I say it is, but it's actually just it's similar to a temple, but it's actually something made out of a cardboard which they've made to celebrate the festival. And then again, you see another image of the South Asian seafarers on the P&O vessel, the P&O Rome, and again that's at the Royal Albert Docks, sorry, in Newham.
So we included this because we wanted, because the talk is about encouraging everybody to try and research more if they're interested into family ancestry, and there's a link here to the Chinese Merchant Seaman Memorial in Liverpool, and another picture of Chinese seamen at a meeting in the East End. Do you know when that photograph was taken?
That photograph was taken in 1917 and it was published in a local newspaper in East London, and it says, you should quickly read the caption. It says, Chinese seamen were recently torpedoed attending an open air meeting in the East End in support of joining the Allies. The flags are those of Great Britain and China. And that was published in a newspaper in 1917, East London.
So I'm just going to shoot through these. These are other images you found of seafarers later, isn't it? 1940.
Yeah, this one's quite.
I know you. Yeah.
Do
Sorry,
you want to go
ahead.
through it? Would you want to go through it through, George? You'd be appreciated.
Sorry, what do you? Sorry.
I was wondering if you'd be happy to go through it, or
What, the picture?
just the picture. Yeah, the picture.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just go through the pictures because it's like almost 25 past. So I'll just go through them. Did you want to say anything about this?
I'm sorry that it's interesting because I was actually going through during my research journey, I came across this one. It was published in a book called Animated Pictures, and I actually got that book here. It's quite a large book, actually. I just show it up on here, but it's quite a large book. Yeah, it was interesting because it's published in 1850 in Animated Pictures, and the heading at the bottom, the image says the boa attacking a sleeping lascar, and it's published in 1850. So it was interesting to find South Asian seafarers, lascars, publications or sketches being drawn in books as early as 1850.
And these images here have recently they're photographs of the names of South Asian seafarers, which have recently been written into a book of commemoration in All Hallows by the Tower, by the Tower Hill Memorial. And you were part of the ceremony when that happened. It was just a couple of weeks ago, I think.
That's right.
This was a ship that was torpedoed in 1917 at the same time as your grandfather was working on the ships.
That's right.
Yeah, and some more recent names from that. So I think yeah, this is the final slide, Asif.
Yeah, it's interesting because yeah, it's an image of my grandfather and my father, and sadly both of them not with me anymore. I recently lost my father in December 2020, and my grandfather passed away in 1965. But I thought this image is interesting because my father's that only link between me and my grandfather, and it's because of him that I have that history. So I thought it'd be nice to have his picture there today.
Thank you, Asif, and absolutely, they provide the link between you today living in Newham and Pakistan and the village that your grandfather came from. So I'm going to stop sharing now and turn off my microphone and hand over to you, Alan.
Yeah, well, if we've got any questions, but there's a few points made in the chat about other links to Muslim sailors. I know from my own family there were like communities in obviously Cardiff and in South Shields, and you know, kind of how your mother met your father was through my mum's stepfather, who was a Muslim sailor from Saudi Arabia, but actually was originally from probably the southwest of Sudan, actually. And his family were one of the servants of King Faisal. So there's quite a lot of kind of toing and throwing across the sort of empire, as is now to be the Middle East. So as you said about Egypt, then about Saudi Arabia, obviously places like Zanzibar, yeah. So Sudan itself was a bit of an entry port for slaves to be transported across the kind of you know, North African and Middle Eastern world. So this is why you will find those names. So it's kind of inspired me to look at more stuff, really. Yeah. As one of the audience said, a brilliant talk. I have enjoyed what you've had to say, and each time you've added to it. So thank you so much for company this evening. And thank you to the audience. We've got 4 or 5 people with us. You know, in the end, what does take half an hour? We've done so much research Asif, that, you know, it was the full hour, but it was so enjoyable. And bringing a story to a much kind of wider audience. This will go on the website and our YouTube channel, and you'll find that, you know, you will gain quite a lot of views there. Okay, and hopefully you do recover that second medal. Yeah. Okay. So if anyone's getting questions, and please do more research. It is so interesting. Okay. Good. Yeah, we could hook up because, as I said before, I've got all my father's discharge books, 40 years of them. Okay, and I list all the bases and the jobs that he did. Okay, so thank you very much. I can verify everything you said, Asif, is piecing history together. Okay, okay. Thank you. Good evening to everyone, and thank you, Georgie, and thank you, Asif. Okay,
Thank you.
go in now. Bye, everyone.